So it's been almost 2 years since these were first proposed, but as of last week, the European Commission had passed the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, called the DMA and the DSA respectively. And collectively, they're called the Digital Services Package. And these two acts have a lot of potential to change quite a bit in the tech world, even if you don't live in the EU. So let's talk about it a little bit. So one question might be, who is targeted by this? And the acts target who the EU considers gatekeepers. There's a list of criteria to determine who is a gatekeeper, but generally this includes internet access providers, hosting services, large search engines, platforms that bring together sellers and consumers. So this could be retail like Amazon, or this could be digital like the app stores on your phone, and also large online platforms and social media. They define large as being more than 10% of the EU's 450 million consumers. And so this is clearly targeting the big tech giants, your Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. This isn't targeting your small mom and pop cloud computing service. And of course, many of these companies can have multiple services in different criteria. For example, Google has their online hosting service, their search engine, and of course the Android App Store. And so these acts can have very wide effects over much of these companies. So the next question might be, what do these two acts do? And according to the EU Commission website, they say that these acts, quote, aim to create a safer digital space where the fundamental rights of users are protected and to establish a level playing field for businesses, unquote. So in other words, there are two goals. Number one is to protect users from the big companies, and number two is to protect the smaller companies from the giants. And so the two acts do this in slightly different ways. First, let's look at the DMA to see how it does it. It has many effects that affect users, developers, and the businesses themselves. So first, let's look at what the DMA requires gatekeepers to allow users to do. It allows users to install apps from third-party stores or to sideload apps. It allows users to uninstall pre-installed apps. It allows them to change the default settings, like the default voice assistant, to a third-party one, which for me would mean goodbye to Siri. And to opt out of default services, for example, web browsers like Microsoft pushing the Edge browser particularly hard in Windows 11. For developers and other businesses, it would allow developers to offer third-party payment options inside of the apps, or to promote things from outside of the App Store. It'll allow developers to integrate their apps into those provided by the gatekeepers. So this could mean a lot of interoperability among messaging services, for example. It requires that developers get access to hardware features and the software necessary to run them. The examples the EU provides are near-field communication technology and authentication technologies. And it allows businesses to access data and metrics from the gatekeepers. So this would be like marketing data, or particularly advertisement performance data. So they have accurate numbers as to what their money has gone to in terms of advertising data on the gatekeepers. And then it has a few restrictions on the gatekeepers themselves. For one, it prevents gatekeepers from giving their own products preferential treatment or ranking them higher than other options. It prevents them from establishing unfair rules for business users, though it doesn't fully explain how that will go down. And as mentioned before, it requires the gatekeepers to provide the data to the developers and the business users. Okay, so that was pretty long. Now let's address the DSA really quick, and then we'll talk about a few of these features. For the DSA, it requires new measures to counter the sale of illegal goods, services, or online content. It requires a means to challenge the content moderator's decisions. It requires a ban on targeted ads, particularly targeted at children, or targeted ads based on sensitive data. So that would be your race, your religion, your gender, your political persuasion. No more targeted ads based on that information. And it bans tactics that are used to sort of trick users into giving up personal data that they otherwise would not. These are typically called dark patterns. Okay, so that was much shorter than the DMA, but no less important. Now let's talk about a few of these. The first one I wanted to talk about was sideloading and uninstalling pre-installed apps. The sideloading thing has been a very big thing that Epic Games has been fighting Apple with for a long time in the US. You might have heard of it as a sort of Apple versus Fortnite sort of thing. And by being able to sideload, maybe iPhone users will be able to play Fortnite again. And for Android, while you could sideload the apps before, have you ever tried to uninstall, say, Chrome or some of their default health apps? On my own old phone, the most I could do was disable them. I could not uninstall them in any way. So these rules will hit Apple and Google particularly hard. Next, I wanted to talk about the rule on gatekeepers that prevents them from favoring their own products or services. This could be useful to both users and the competitors on the marketplaces. Have you ever searched for an app or searched for a product, and you usually will start with one of the first few that show up? Even if you don't end up buying that, you usually start there, or at least I do. If you're looking at, say, Amazon, if you go on there and search for most basic products like batteries, some furniture, or some electronics, you will typically get an Amazon Basics option, if there is one, as one of the first items to start with. And so for many people, they have to compete with the marketplace on the marketplace. It's a very hard spot to be in for many of these companies. And so this kind of levels the playing field a bit for them. Next, I wanted to talk about allowing developers to be able to provide services or payment options outside of the gatekeepers. This is kind of what started the whole Apple versus Epic thing I talked about before, was that Apple, as well as Google, their payment option takes a 30% cut of whatever payment is made through the app, which for many developers is very steep, especially developers who already have their own payment option in place. They already have a payment option in place with usually much lower percentages in terms of fees. And so that 30% cut can really hurt them for many developers. And so this just gives you options. Maybe as a user, we might see a discounted version if you go with the developer's payment option as opposed to Apple Pay or Google Pay. And to briefly discuss the DSA rules, I wanted to say that I like the idea of being able to challenge moderator decisions on rulings. One thing I do kind of worry about is that they'll make it too challenging or too tedious to challenge them. And so they would technically meet the rule, but it wouldn't really be useful. We'll have to see what happens there. And of course, the general protections against targeted ads and data phishing, I think, are great. So one of the common problems with these types of rules is that they have no teeth. And by that I mean that the punishments are barely a slap on the wrist. It's common to see news articles of a big company being fined a few $1 million for some violation. And while that is a lot of money, to many of these companies that have annual revenue in the billions of dollars, it's not that punishing to them in any way. So do these acts have teeth? Now, in theory, yes, they do. For DMA violations, the fines can go up to 10% of annual global turnover, and they can go up to 6% for DSA violations. And those percentages can increase with repeat violations. Of course, the unknown quantity here is how strictly the EU will actually enforce these new rules. So keep that in mind. And while these acts were just passed, don't expect any immediate change. These will take months to be implemented in the first place, so we probably won't see change for quite a while here. So there's a quick summary of what's going on in the EU with their digital services package. There's so much going on in these acts that it will likely affect you in some way, even if you are not an EU resident. Let me know which of these you're most excited for, or maybe if you're more concerned about this. For me, I would say that as a user, I'm most excited about being able to change and uninstall pre-installed apps, particularly with how hard Microsoft pushes Edge and makes it very hard to change your default browser in Windows 11. I am glad we can just say no and hopefully uninstall Edge, as well as the default apps on your iPhone and your Android device. And with that, thank you for watching. If you're interested, maybe check out my I Switched to iPhone series that I recently finished. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.